It's like it's a problem that you've been coached in this way, where somebody have yelled at you to do something every day, year round, week after week, so that if I give you an assignment or something, a problem to solve, you're unable to do it, because the only way you respond is if I stand in your face and scream at you.
Who are you?
Well, good question. So my name is Christian. I'm an associate professor at Norwegian School of Sports Science, where I've been for the last 15 years, first as a student and as a PhD student, and then working as a postdoctoral researcher, and then as an associate professor. And I've been coaching handball for the last 15 years as well, something like that. Stopped playing in 2009, I think. That was my last season when they started paying me more money for coaching than playing. And then I was coaching professionally for some years, and then on the side when I started working here. I'm a EHF master coach. I have my professional certificate, and I've been working across the club, association and school spectrum in Norway. And then we're at this beautiful place called the Norwegian School of Sports Science,
Yep.
which is a specialized university, a little bit like the Sports University in Köln, I think, where you can study sports in different ways or through different programs. We have these beautiful facilities. We have a large indoor arena. We have the football court. We have a athletics court. We have tennis courts and a lot of stuff that actually needs a little bit of redecorating, but still it's a good place to be. And then we're located just on the outskirts of the forest, and you can just go on for miles. So if you're interested in sport and want to visit Norway, then the Norwegian School of Sports Science is a good place to start.
Yeah, it's also when you talk about all these different places to take different kind of sports. Is this one thing of the Norwegian sports culture, that young players make different sports when they're young, and then
Yeah.
how is this? How would you describe the sports culture in Norway?
Well, it's interesting because when you look at what people discuss at internationally or across seas in the U.S. and North America, everybody's arguing about, should you specialize early or should you sample different sports? And then I would say it's very, very culturally situated, because we have the same debate in Norway, but when you look at Norwegians, everybody samples different sports, because if you grow up as a kid in Norway, you play organized sports. So 93% of Norwegians play organized sports. They play different sports. So it's just part of culture. So you go to football, you go to handball, you go to ice hockey, you go to athletics or gymnastics or whatever, and you just, there's no structure to it. It's just that you get exposed to a lot of different sports. And I think that kind of idea is something we're not that aware of, but it just happens. It's just how sport is very, very decentralized in Norwegian society. There's a sports club around every corner. It's voluntary driven. That's why we can have so many sports clubs, so many activities for especially children and youth. If it was professional, we wouldn't have enough funding or enough for coaches and stuff like that. So you wouldn't have this kind of mass participation in sports. And then when we look at how Norwegians are involved in sports, they practice a lot. So during adolescence, from 13 years old to 15 years old, or when they're 13 to 15 years old, almost 40% practice more than 3 times a week. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot compared to kind of like going to football practice, grassroots football once a week or stuff like that. 40% are actually very involved with sports. And then at the end of high school, when you're 18, 19 years old, one out of 4, so 25%, they still continue to play organized sports when they're at the adult level.
Okay. Yeah, that's an amazing number, right? And for this sports culture, it's a good fixed point
Yeah,
to get these players on this international top level.
yeah,
But besides that, one question is about the education of coaches, because when people getting this experience from different kind of sports,
yeah,
how is the impact of their coaching?
yeah. Well, it's interesting. It might be that it's something I'm not that aware of that that makes sports across genres or like across sports in Norway, that makes coaching, that makes leadership, that makes training methodology more similar because we have experience across. I don't think it's not something that you plan for, but I would think that we approach sports in a similar fashion. If it's this sport or that sport, it looks alike. But still, you have some strong sports cultures, like in swimming. If you would look at swimming coaches or their training methodology, it would be different than football or handball and some of these other sports. But when you talk about, so maybe I'm taking the conversation a bit further, but when you're talking about coaching and leadership, you would say that, or you could say that those the values that are kind of inherent to Norwegian society and to the social welfare model, and is kind of it's very egalitarian, decentralized. It's about democracy, democratic leadership, athlete involvement in our case, or involvement in like decision making and stuff like that if you go to a professional company or whatever. And those kind of ideas trickle down to how we approach sports coaching as well. So, and I don't think we realize that, but if you were to be a coach that's very authoritarian, in Norway, very hierarchical, top-down, yelling, screaming, punishment, stuff like that, nobody would hire you, or it would be difficult for you to get hired because those expectations from both those being coached or the club or the parents or whatever is different.
Yeah. Can you describe a typical Norwegian coach? What are the attributes of them?
Well, so a typical Norwegian coach would be concerned. So everything is relative. So I would say that maybe we need to get more involved with athlete involvement, but every Norwegian coach would be concerned about athlete involvement. He would be concerned that the decision-making process is at least partly decentralized and kind of has some kind of anchorage in like the wider group. It's important to get your athletes to buy into the philosophy or methodology and give them some leverage to kind of become involved in that kind of process. I think a lot of it is also because in handball especially, and maybe in Norwegian sports across as well, is because our women's national handball team was so successful for the last 24 years or so, with Marit Breivik especially as head coach, and now Thue, which kind of became like a Norwegian phenomena of how leadership in sports or sports coaching could be done. Yep. So the picture that's painted of Marit, for example, was that this kind of egalitarian, democratic leadership, and these girls smiling, having fun, and performing at a very, very high level at the same time. And with then Yevgeny Trefilov on the other side, head coach of Russia, in the same time period, you had these really, really huge contrasts. And Marit was famous in Norwegian society. So these ideas or ideals about democratic leadership, they kind of trickled down into Norwegian handball, and they also came across Norwegian sports. So and you have more examples like Marit, but she kind of became the go-to example for how you can do leadership. And then if you really look into the processes in the national team, it didn't mean that Marit wasn't in kind of control, but it was a different way of doing leadership. And I would say that sometimes they kind of, maybe it was more control than what you could actually it looks like it's little control, but actually it's a lot of control. And then if I'm asking you to voice your advice, but I've ingrained you in the same way of thinking, then I know what I can, what you would suggest. We could discuss if that really is athlete involvement, but at least it's relative. And when you look at Norwegian coaches, at both the elite level and at the youth level, it's this idea of democratic leadership is really ingrained into our culture.
Okay. What is the typical way of education of a coach? Is there a specific from the government? Is it controlled? Because now you say it's decentralized.
Yeah.
So how much impact got the Norwegian Handball Forbund also in it?
Yeah, that's it's interesting because you got two ways of becoming educated as a coach in Norway. So one would be the path, the federation or association pathway, and the other one would be to study sports science and sports coaching at the higher educational level, at the university level. That would be two different ways of becoming a coach. The coach education in the Handball Association is related to to the Norwegian Confederation of Sports. So if you're a football, and why Norwegian coaches are alike, well, their coach education at the association level should be similar if you're a football coach, if you're a handball coach, if you're a swimming coach, if you're whatever. So it's based around this idea of Norwegian values and stuff like that. But then if you go, so most people would get their certificate from the association. That's part-time. The Norwegian Handball Association has done a great job. So coach education is available at the grassroots level to almost every coach there is. Yeah. It's low cost, it's easy to access, it's everywhere, and then most Norwegian coaches have to have like a level 1 or level 2 certificate, and a lot of them do. So even if they're a voluntary coach, if they're a parent or whatever, they do this kind of level 1, level 2 certificate for coaching, and then some of them progress to level 3 and level 4 in the association's education, and some of them go on to more like the study of sports coaching at the higher university level, like here. So if you choose to study sports coaching at Norwegian School of Sports Science, then it's a really comprehensive, multidisciplinary study of sports coaching. Yeah. It should be based around your sport, but it's still you get a lot of sports science, you get a lot of sports psychology, some sports sociology, a lot of sports coaching, performance analysis, exercise physiology and stuff like that. So it's multidisciplinary, and it's really a comprehensive study. So if I were to choose, but I'm biased, I would always hire a coach that if I've got to choose between a coach that has this background or that background, I would choose someone who has this background. It's more comprehensive. But then the federation education is really close linked with actual handball practice and handball methodology and stuff like that. So what I would advise my students is that they take their education here. While they do that, even though they get their certificate, they should also kind of do this in parallel with their association education.
Mm-hmm. And especially here from your school or from your students, which are the typical jobs they do after their education?
Well, most of them. The sports coaching students here, they actually are one of the groups that actually get to work with what they're educated for. But what they do is that because coaching there's not that many professional positions. So except for football, where it seems like everyone becomes a professional coach, the handball students, they would get paid coaching part-time. And then they would probably combine that with a teaching position. A lot of them will get a teaching position in a handball academy or like a handball sports school or a sports school program. So what you would do then was that was how I worked for some years, was that maybe 2 or 3 mornings a week you're coaching in the school system, and then on your evenings, then you go into club practice and whatever club you're with. So that kind of combination it's difficult, but it's what most people do.
Okay. Yeah, that's great because right now I saw a lot of these young coaches that work at these schools.
Yeah.
Can you give us a short impact on these? How is this schools model here? Because right now I'm visiting a lot of private schools for handball, but there are also government schools.
Yeah.
How is it?
Yeah. So what they did was that you have a long history of sports school programs in Norwegian educational system, and in 2005 there was a change of legislation that allowed more schools, both public and private, to open up or to start sports school programs with specialized sports practice. So you have this huge system of at least maybe 110 public schools, and then private schools, what could that be? Maybe 20, 25 something private schools around Norway. So maybe you're talking somewhere between 100 and 150 sports school programs focusing on different sports, but the big sports are part of everyone: football, handball, stuff like that, skiing. And then, so what happens is that when you grow up now, most kids will have the opportunity to apply for a sports school program and to get access to a sports school program. They vary in quality. Some of them are really comprehensive in the sense where they practice at school every day. Some of them have practices 2 times a week. Some of them have a really strong cooperation with only one or with one single club, and most of them have have kids coming in from different clubs. So that kind of creates the sports school. So the sports school system in Norway is not. It's not the same. It depends on where you go, and that kind of flexibility also allows them to kind of do things their way based on their local conditions, which is a good thing. So if you can combine that with high quality practice and at least good coordination between clubs and schools, then you kind of get a really and a very not too fragile system. It's a robust system.
Are there any plans from the government or from the sports government that they get these that they made the chance for young coaches to go abroad?
No.
Are there any kind of thinkings?
Very little, and that's interesting because so what we're producing, which is in a sense a good thing and in a sense a challenge, is more of the same, because there's very few incentives, there's very few programs, there's no formalized structures that helps Norwegian coaches in handball or in at least most other sports. There's no strong incentives to go abroad and experience different cultures, and I think a prerequisite for challenging our thinking is kind of experiencing difference, and that's difficult to do if you don't experience difference on or kind of physical. You need a physical experience. You need to be there to kind of feel how these things works differently in other cultures or places or locations or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's because I'm visiting a lot of practicing and I see this high intrinsic motivation of the players.
Yeah.
And it's with this democratic way of coaching, it's combined in a perfect way, because you don't need to yell, you don't need to punish, you don't need to push them, because they got this huge intrinsic motivation. And then I was thinking about how many Norwegian coaches, because you got these huge and very good sports science education, how many of them goes abroad?
Yeah.
So
no, and there's not that many.
Yeah.
Not that many. But then most handball coaches, so it's a little bit with who you met as well. You met a lot of coaches that's been educated here, but most Norwegian handball coaches don't have a
that high level.
No,
Yeah,
no.
of course.
They don't have an university education
Yeah.
in sports coaching. They have their association level education.
Okay.
And-
Let's talk about the Norwegian way of handball and how the development goes, and what are the next plans about it. Because here I see a very good combination of the halfbacks and the wingers. I see it on the Eliteserien that the most of the goals came from this area and maybe from the pivot, but not many from out of 9 meters. What do you think is the reason for it? Is there any specific, maybe we talk about the school system, and some of them doesn't work with the clubs, so they got to try these intensity low levels so they're not getting an injury.
Well, it's interesting. I think that because I think so kind of what are the style of play in Norwegian handball across
Yeah,
women's
exactly.
and men's handball? That would be a very, very strong focus on fast-paced play and counterattacks. And that gets ingrained pretty early, at least through adolescence. I would think that combined with this idea of athleticism, kind of self-selects a lot of the players that continue to play handball, because if you're big and slow, it's going to be difficult for you to keep up with that style of play. And it can be a good thing or a bad thing. But I think that a problem in women's handball was that all our elite level players at just some years back were like these really, really agile but pretty short players. And we really wanted to recruit someone who was like kind of like these 9-meter shooters. And they had projects trying to bring more tall females or women playing handball and stuff like that, but still, it's like the way we play, the way you train, the way it kind of self-selects, then it's going to be difficult to grow up as someone who's a bit gawky and taller and kind of more of a slow mover in Norwegian handball.
Yeah.
And I think you see that in men's handball to an extent as well. And it's just become the way of playing handball in Norway. Then it should be played fast. So what you would say, and it should be played fast, and it should be pretty. And this idea of athleticism as well. So if you look at Norwegian, the physical capacity of Norwegian handball players, that's pretty strong as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I understand. What is what did you think is the most important position for the Norwegian handball? Because when you see sometimes different coaches, I totally would agree that in Germany it's a back player, halfbacks.
Yeah.
So because it's very easy to train them, and they are important for the game. But when I watch Eliteserien games, most of the goals are shooted from the wing players.
Position. Yeah. Well, it's a difficult question. It's an interesting observation because I've never done that. I've never had that observation myself. And then what we do in Norway is probably the same that they do across or in handball across the globe. It's like when you start playing with the kids, those people, the guy that can't catch the ball, can't shoot or anything, who's not central to the play, you push him out in the wing position. So how come then, and you do that in Norway,
Same
how,
in Germany.
Yeah, and then how come that, or where does that change? Also, one thing would be that you've had some good international players in the wing position even before the men's team was successful in Norway. Håvard Tvetten especially. You played in Spain and then in Denmark for several years, and then maybe Camilla Harrem in the women's team that were kind of that's been influential for kids playing handball because they've become role models. They're playful in their style of play, and that kind of spurred maybe at least influenced the how kids viewed that position. It was more fun being a wing player. It showed some of the possibilities of being a wing player. It was fun practicing because all the time you tried to figure out new ways of shooting and stuff like that. And maybe that has had an influence, but it's a speculation from my side. So it's difficult to pin down.
One of my experiences with this democratic way of coaching is that they combine this play fun with this huge freedom. And with that they put they put in when they play 4 against 4 in the center, every wing players get the shot before. And so they got 30, 40, maybe 50 shots in the practice with a lot of freedom and no judgment when the ball doesn't go inside.
And that's interesting because I think that you learn early in your coach education, if it's here or if it's there, doesn't matter, that all players are important. You should take care of everybody. That means if people are playing different positions, everybody has to. So an egalitarian interpretation of that would be that everybody should get the same amount of shots every session. So if we're practicing in different positions, then we need to ensure that if you shoot, then I should get to shoot after that. And how this is interesting. I've never thought about it that way, but that would probably have an impact on how practice is organized and how much you get to practice. And then it becomes fun playing in different positions because you get to try and figure out. And it's very un-Norwegian to yell at someone who misses the target. So the common understanding would be that it doesn't help anybody if you yell at them. And it's so ingrained in how we think about what's right and how we do it that it just goes unaware. I would think that you don't need to learn that in coach education. It's part of your experience playing sports in Norway, or at least handball, that if you just start coaching, you wouldn't need to learn it. It's part of your cultural heritage or cultural education or cultural learning, I would say. And it's very, very interesting because our discussions is still about athlete involvement, how to get athletes more engaged, more involved, how to destabilize this power relationship between coach and athletes and stuff like that. But then relative to other sports cultures, we're kind of on this point of the scale already. But it's interesting. But I think that if you would go to Norwegian ice hockey, you would see a hugely different culture in how you approach sports coaching.
Okay.
Much more top down. Hopefully no ice hockey coaches will listen to this, but more authoritarian. And I was it's like it's a problem that you've been coached in this way, where somebody have yelled at you to do something every day, year round, week after week, so that if I give you an assignment or something, a problem to solve, you're unable to do it, because the only way you respond is if I stand in your face and scream at you. Or sports coaching in handball.
Very good, thank you very much. One last question is, would you like to share some story or some thoughts about the Norwegian handball we are not talking about right now? So is there anything you like to tell? This is the Norwegian way of handball, and this beside the democratic way of coaching, or beside the wing player freedom, or anything like the practicing, is there any kind of thought?
Well, I think that some of these ideas of Norwegian sport, not making the distinction between elite sports development and sports participation, it's something that really is the foundation of why we're successful in Norwegian sports in general, and especially in Norwegian handball. So not making that distinction and not closing down the talent development system is like it's a huge, has a huge impact on athlete and talent development in Norway. And I think when you then want to look at, if you want to pick something from Norwegian handball and try and kind of think